This is the last in a series of 4 videos, all about revising paper 2 of the GCSE English Language exam with AQA. This is an exclusive practice paper that cannot be found anywhere else, and new papers are always essential to build resilience and confidence. If you are eager to revise paper 2 question 5, then please check out videos 45, 46 and 47, which is all about non-fiction writing and how to write effective articles. I just want to make it very clear that this video or any others in this series are not advertisements or endorsements for any places mentioned, and that I'm not affiliated with any locations, events or places referred to. The link for the source A extract is in the description box below, published in 2011 on the Guardian website. For this video, as you can see, we're looking at paper 2 question 4, which is all about comparing writers' viewpoints and attitudes. The question that we're going to be looking at today in this video is this. We need to look at the whole of source A and the whole of source B, as will be the case in the exam, and we need to compare the writer's attitudes about the accommodation and the experiences they describe. So the theme of this paper is accommodation. So in source A, written by a man called Alex Plim, he's writing about a hotel called Peckforton Castle, which is this luxury 5-star hotel. And source B, which is written by Henry Mayhew from the Victorian era, the 19th century, which is about an asylum for the houseless poor in London. So even though both writers are talking about 2 places to stay, they're very different places to stay. And that might mean that the writers have very different attitudes about what they are describing for us. Some of you might be coming to this video from the other 3 videos in this series, in which case you are already familiar with these extracts, but some of you might be jumping straight to question 4, which is why I'm going to start this video again by going through the reading through those 2 extracts. We have to remember that I think this is probably the challenging question for paper 2 for all students, simply because there's quite a lot to do. We have to remember, really important, that we are comparing what each writer thinks and feels about what they're talking about. This is supposed to be different to question 2, for example. We need to come up with some words to describe their attitudes, and we also need to reinforce those attitudes by making reference to writers' methods, including language techniques and sentence types as necessary. We also need to be able to explain to the examiner why we think the writers have the view that they do. What's happened to them? What have they seen? What have they experienced? Because sometimes the opinions and attitudes that we have aren't just randomly picked by ourselves, they're a result of things we've actually been through. So that's what we're going to be looking at for this video. Question 4, there's a cycle which I use in my teaching, which is designed to gather all the information that you need before beginning to write a response. So we're going to be following this cycle as we go through this video. Let's first look then at source A, written by Alex Plim, in which he reviews a luxurious hotel in Cheshire called Peckforton Castle. And I said, if you are joining us from the previous videos in this practice paper series, then you might already be obviously familiar with this. So Alex Plim says, when I heard I was to partake in a falconry session during my stay at Peckforton Castle, I can't say the prospect compelled me to dash outside and embrace the nearest stranger. How interesting, I wondered, could a bird really be? My scepticism lasted only until the first feathery blur appeared on my outstretched wrist. Then I felt like a child who had just discovered Play-Doh. To see these creatures up close was fascinating. Their feet wrinkled like a grandmother's fallen tights, jacket of feathers fanned like splayed playing cards, and astute eyes steadfastly piercing their human perch. I'd have been happy to study a pigeon in this much detail, but Danny the falconer introduced Alfie, his golden eagle. He is one heck of a bird, and I couldn't help but wonder what might happen if a bunch of these guys settled themselves on the electricity cable outside my house. A few hours earlier, we had arrived at Peckforton Castle via a maze of country lanes. As we rounded the final corner, our eyes stumbled across the hotel's brooding arched entrance, along its slender Gothic windows and down to its parched moat, and for a brief moment we were Hermione and Ron arriving for our first term at Hogwarts. Peckforton itself is something of an anachronistic muddle, built in a Gothic medieval style midway through the 19th century, by a lord who fathered a formidable 24 sons. It is now a Grade 1 listed building, replete with innovations from the modern age. Inside, the foyer is guarded by a fantastically effulgent suit of armour that jigs in the playful light of a great fire. The bedrooms are impressive. Ours was big enough to host a gymnastics competition, and we spent our first half hour participating in a spot of hotel room Olympics a la Brilla Bryson, complete with coat hanger fencing and toilet roll bowls. The thrill of it all was exhausting, but Peckforton has that covered with its tranquility spa, where guests can be relieved of the stresses and strains caused by overexcitement. Peckforton's other trump card is its cuisine. In both the 2010 Brasserie and the 2AA Rosette 1851 restaurants, where I expanded my gastronomic lexicon by discovering that roast pain jus actually means gravy. It was the hotel's morning repast that really captured my heart, though. I see an all-you-can-eat buffet as a thrown gauntlet, and here every foodstuff you could wish to meet post-slumber is piled into neat mountains waiting to be devoured. And so it was with a heavy heart and an even heavier stomach that I bade farewell to the dusty red bricks of Peckforton Castle. Bizarrely, a few months after our visit, the hotel suffered an arson attack that left 14 of its 48 bedrooms frazzled. 8 of these have already been restored, and the ongoing reparations are being done so surreptitiously you wouldn't even know about it had I not just told you. But it will be December at the earliest before "Hey, do you smell burnt sausage?" stops echoing around the castle's east wing. Okay, so that's source A. And what I want you to remember is the reason why we're reading these articles is because we have to work out what the man writing this thinks about the castle. What is his attitude about the castle? In order to make the comparison, because of course this is a comparison question, we have to then compare this with source B. And source B, as I've stated, is written by a chap called Henry Mayhew, quite a prominent Victorian writer, and he's writing about an asylum for the poor situated in London. And a vagabond is someone who wanders from place to place without a home or job. Again, if you are joining us from the language question or the summary question, then this again will be familiar to you. So Mayhew writes, "There is a world of wisdom to be learnt at the asylum for the houseless poor. Those who wish to be taught in this, the severest school of all, should pay a visit to the playhouse yard and see the homeless crowds gathered about the asylum, waiting for the first opening of the doors, with their bare feet, blue and ulcerous with the cold, resting for hours on the ice and snow in the streets, and the bleak stinging wind blowing through their rags. To hear the cries of the hungry shivering children, and the wrangling of the greedy men, scrambling for a bed and a pound of dry bread, is a thing to haunt one for life. There are 400 and odd creatures utterly destitute, mothers with infants at their breasts, fathers with boys holding by their side, the friendless, the penniless, the shirtless, shoeless, breadless, homeless, in a word, the very poorest of this, the very richest city in the world. The asylum for the houseless is the confluence of the many tides of poverty that, at this period of the year, flow towards the metropolis. Brickmakers, agricultural labourers, garden women, and many such vocations are labours that admit of being performed only in the summer, when indeed the labourer has the fewest wants to satisfy. The privations of such classes, then, come at a period when even the elements conspire to make their destitution more terrible. Hence, restless with want, they wander in hordes across the land, making in vain hope for London, as the great emporium of wealth, the market of the world. But London is as overstocked with hands as every other nook and corner of the country. And then the poor creatures, far away from home and friends, find at last to their cost that the very privations that they were flying from pursue them here with tenfold severity. Winter is the beggar's harvest. That there are hundreds of professional vagabonds drawn to London at such a time, I am well aware, but with them come the unemployed workmen." Okay, and that's source B. So now we have read both extracts, and of course this is a video, you can pause it to go back and just clarify anything. And again, you don't have to worry about understanding every single word, as long as you get the gist of it. That's the most important thing. So there might be words in this extract, as the older extract, that you're not quite sure of, but that doesn't mean you're going to do badly. It just means you might not want to refer to that word. So, or you could guess what it means, of course. So going back to our flowchart, we've done the orange section. We've read each extract. The next thing that we would need to do is we would need to take our highlighter and select some quotes from each extract that demonstrates in our mind what the attitude of each writer may be about the Peckforton Castle and about the asylum. For the purposes of this video, I have chosen 2 quotes from each source. You have to remember that this is a 20-minute task approximately. You have to be quite realistic about how much you can do in that time. So you're not going to write a 10,000 word essay. So don't give yourself too much to do. It's far better to do less well than a lot badly. Okay? Always quality, not quantity. So in this table, you can see I've picked 2 quotes from Peck and I've picked 2 quotes from Mayhew. And it's from these quotes I'm going to try and infer what their attitudes are about the castle and the asylum that they are talking about. So we've now done the grey section. The next thing we have to do is we have to look at those quotes and we need to try and find some methods. We have to try and find if we have any language techniques or any sentence types at play. So you can see that I've now added that in here in purple. We've got a couple of similes, we've got some adjectives, we've got a verb, and we've also got a declarative sentence. So we've got a variety here of sentence types, word types, and language techniques. So we've got a good spread here of devices. And it doesn't matter, what devices they are, as long as you refer to them. If you look at the exam paper, there's a bullet point under the question that reminds you that you must talk about methods, which is what is included here in purple. So we're now on to the blue section. We need to now come up with some words that we would use to describe what these attitudes are of the writers based on these quotes. And I've done that here in red. So we could argue that Peck is fascinated, intrigued, and then he moves on to be saddened and affectionate when it's time to leave the hotel. On the other hand, we could argue that Mayhew is disturbed and shocked, and then later sympathetic, horrified, and angered by what he sees. And want to make it very clear that it's these red words which are really the driving force of your response, because at the end of the day, this is what you are comparing. You're not comparing the castle or the hotel with the asylum. You've done that for question 2. You're now comparing their attitudes. Okay, so that's the important thing. Those red words have to be in there, so the examiner can clearly see you are talking about their attitudes and therefore answering the question. The last thing that we have to do is the green bit, which is try and develop this. Why do they have the attitudes that they do? Why, is Peck intrigued? Why is Mayhew angered? We need to try and work out why they are feeling that way. And again, it might be useful to put yourself in the shoes of the writer, because chances are you would feel the same as they do based on what they tell us that they see and hear, etc. So lastly, in green here, we have some ideas about why they have the views that they do. And again, I'm not going to go through all of these for time purposes, but you can obviously pause the video. Just to look at that top left box, after his initial scepticism, he really enjoyed the falconry show, this bird show. He was really kind of awestruck by the size of the bird, really interested in it, and he appreciates the birds and he likes watching them fly. So that is giving you some development of ideas. We can't just say, oh, Peck is fascinated, because the examiner would say, well, why? Tell us why. So we have to go into the detail why they have the views that they do. And you could also put yourself, like I say, in the shoes of the writer, and you might feel the same. Okay, so again, you can see with each of these boxes, I have developed why they might have the view that they do. So now we're in a position to actually write the response. And this is why question 4 might take a little bit of planning. It takes a little bit of thinking about, because of all these little different components that have to be part of the response. So to finish this video, I'm going to show you a simple answer, and then I'm going to show you a more effective answer. Okay. So on the left here, we have a simple response. Whereas the writer of source A really enjoys his visit to the hotel, the writer of source B hates the asylum. The hotel offers the writer enjoyment and fun, but the visit to the asylum makes the writer sad by what he sees. That will get you some marks, maybe 3 out of 16 perhaps, but it won't get you many marks. And again, it all depends on what your predicted grade is, what you're aiming to get with English language. But if you're aiming to get, obviously, a grade 4, you would have to develop your response a little bit more than that. So on the right hand side, I have developed it into at least a grade 4 response. I'm just going to read through this and I'm going to highlight what makes it effective in relation to the mark scheme. Okay. So both Peck and Mayhew express different views about their visits to each type of accommodation and what they experience there. In source A, Peck is initially sceptical about the falconry show, but after he sees the birds flying, he states that the birds were fascinating and uses two similes, comparing them to playing cards and tights, suggesting he is trying to vividly create imagery of the birds to reinforce his excitement and awe. After enjoying the large bedrooms and the food, he says with a heavy heart and an even heavier stomach that I bade farewell, suggesting the hotel was a wonderful experience for him and he never wanted to leave and go back to normality. He conveys typical feelings of sadness when the holiday is over. However, Mayhew has a shocked and disturbed attitude when writing about the homeless asylum, saying to hear the cries of the hungry, shivering children is a thing to haunt one for life. This reinforces how sad and sombre he felt, seeing and hearing children suffering, and that it was so awful that he will never forget it. The adjective hungry and verb shivering conveys how the children were suffering because of a lack of warmth, clothes, and food. Later, he states that the elements conspire to make their destitution even more terrible, implying the weather makes the suffering worse, as if nature is punishing the poor people more than they are being punished already, like in some form of pathetic fallacy. As a result, Mayhew is both sympathetic and depressed by what he sees during his visit to the asylum, as well as angry that this poverty and suffering exists in a rich country. And I always think it's very interesting that 200 years or so after this extract was written, source B, society is still grappling with the same idea, that we are still a rich country and yet we still have many, many people in poverty. I think that says something interesting perhaps about society and what we are like in treating poverty perhaps. So clearly there, the answer on the right is more developed, it's clearly more detailed, but in terms of the mark scheme, what is it that makes it effective? And this is the last slide. So you can see I've got methods in green, attitude in red, and quotes or evidence in blue. So you can see that all of this fits together. And again, it is the red words that is driving your response, because this is a question where you are comparing what the writers think and feel. And these red words do that. In order to reinforce that more, you're also referring to methods, which I've put in green here, you can see, and the quotes as well, which is also another bullet point under the question in the exam booklet as well. So the quotes there are also showing the examiner that I am rooting my analysis and my explanation in the words of the text, the evidence of the text. So that concludes this series of 4 videos about the reading section of paper 2. Like I say, this past paper is exclusive. It cannot be found anywhere else. So I'm hoping that these videos are helpful in revising paper 2. And obviously go back and you can rewatch any of those videos or go back into the playlists of my channel and see any other videos from previous months and even years which I've created about paper 2. We're quite fortunate in English that we kind of know what the questions will be before we get the exam. The only thing we don't know, of course, is what the extracts will be. But we do know, for example, that question 3 will be language. We do know that question 5 will be an article and so on. So we already know quite a bit about the exam before we get the extracts. Also worth bearing in mind that paper 2 will always, of course, come after paper 1. So when you start paper 2, you're not starting from 0, you're starting from whatever you got from paper 1. So you're using paper 2 to top up those marks that you got from paper 1, which will then add up to your final GCSE grade. Okay. So thank you very much, and all the best in your forthcoming exams.